In the deepest, darkest forests of the Appalachians, there's a legend. It's passed down in whispers between old shacks and fireplaces. They say a creature lives there that doesn't walk, it bounces, a demon with horns and hooves that acts as the judge of souls for those drowned in their own sins. This land, the Appalachians, isn't just mountains, it's an ancient ridge stretching over 2,000 miles from New York to Alabama. Formed millions of years ago by clashing continents, volcanoes, and earthquakes, it hides impassable gorges where fog swallows trails and night whispers the names of forgotten miners and Cherokee warriors. Local old-timers, worn out from years of coal digging in the dark shafts of West Virginia and Kentucky, gather around a crackling fire in the fall when the leaves bleed red and gold. "Don't head into the Blue Ridge after sunset," mutters Grandpa with his pipe, staring into the flames. The bouncer hears your sins through the fog. He doesn't chase prey. He judges the souls of those who've been lying to themselves for years. The legend dates back to Cherokee times when a horned silhouette with hooves clacking on Blue Ridge rocks would bounce from peak to peak, as if weight and gravity had no hold over it. The first written mentions appear in the 1800s. Miners heard its bounces before cave-ins in Pennsylvania mines. One survivor, covered in soot, whispered before dying, "It looked at me with empty eyes, and I saw my theft of my buddy's paychecks, the ones left buried under the rubble." Since then, hikers find its tracks, deep cloven hoof prints around tents, the smell of sulfur in the air, and empty spots where tents of the vanished once stood. The fog here is sticky, like the breath of a grave rising from hidden springs in dark hollows. Pines groan under the cold wind from Kentucky valleys, and wet leaves rustle underfoot as if warning of an approach. The Appalachians aren't just a landscape, they're a place where nature feels alive and hostile. Chasms lurk around trail bends, small streams bubble up from dark pits and vanish, and dense woods block out moonlight. It's not wolves or bears that scare the most here. The judge rules. He doesn't roar. His bounces sound like the heartbeat of your guilt in the night's silence. Hikers find his tracks come morning, circling tents like he danced around you all night, leaving the smell of scorched moss and emptiness in the eyes of those who have seen him. He picks those who've been lying to themselves for years, say the old folks in smoky bars of West Virginia towns. Miners, hunters, tourists, for all of them, he's one and the same. Over the years, the legend stopped being just a campfire story and turned into a quiet accounting of strange deaths the mountains collected. Old Coleman in West Virginia talk about a collapse in a drift mine back in the 1890s. They say the timbers creaked all night before the roof went, but over that groan, they heard a different sound. Something heavy striking stone again and again. In a slow, patient rhythm. Not footsteps, not tools, like a weight bouncing on the same spot, waiting for someone to admit what they had done. When the dust settled, 3 men were dead, pinned under rock. The only survivor swore he had seen a shape in the lantern light just before the cave-in, long limbs tucked under it like springs, horns scraping the ceiling as it tilted its head. He said it did not smile, did not snarl. It simply watched him. And in its empty gaze, he remembered every corner he had cut on the job, every support he had skipped to hurry the shift. In the 1930s, when the Great Depression drove hungry men into the backwoods to hunt whatever moved, a trapper went missing along a high hollow in eastern Kentucky. They found his camp still warm, coffee gone cold in the pot, rifle leaning against a stump. No bear prints, no cat tracks, no sign of a fight. Just a ring of deep, cloven marks in the frozen ground, evenly spaced, circling the fire. The snow had melted in a perfect band where those hoofs had landed, as if the heat had followed them. Folks in town said the trapper had a habit of claiming other men's pelts as his own. Out here, they said, lies were just another kind of bait, and something had finally taken it. Hikers talk now, in forums and late-night podcasts, about waking up to find perfect circles of prints around their tents on the Appalachian Trail. No approach, no retreat, just a loop, like something bounced around them all night, close enough to touch the nylon, but never crossing the line. Some swear they heard laughter in the fog. Others heard nothing at all, only realized in the morning that the moss near their camp smelled faintly burned, and that the dreams they had were not dreams at all, but memories they had worked hard to bury. The ones who live here long enough learn to treat those stories like weather reports, not entertainment, warnings. The rules are never written down, but if you sit long enough in a bar that smells like old smoke and spilled beer, the mountains will give them to you through a stranger's mouth. Do not camp on a ridge where the fog stays past noon. Do not sleep beside stone piles you did not build. Do not follow voices in the dark, especially when they sound like someone you love. And above all, do not spend a long winter in these hills lying to yourself. The black bear will take your food, the cougar might take your life, but the bouncing demon only comes for the part of you that has been rotting for years. They say it does not need to chase. It lets you walk yourself into the worst of the country. The blind hollows, the sinkholes under the leaves, the ledges that crumble if you don't test them. It waits at the one place on the trail where you know you should turn back and watches which choice you make. If you keep going, pretending you're not lost, pretending you're not scared, pretending you have not been carrying the same guilt since the day you left home, that is when you hear it. Not a roar, not a growl. Just that dull, echoing bounce somewhere in the fog behind you, matching your heartbeat. By then, the old-timers say it is not really hunting you anymore, it's just keeping the score. Most people who pass through these mountains never see anything worse than a bad storm or a twisted ankle. The demon is not interested in every tourist who buys a mug with a black bear on it. It's picky. It waits for the ones who come here trying to outrun something. A mistake, a secret, a body in their past that never got a proper funeral. The Appalachians are full of places to disappear, after all. Old mine shafts that were never mapped, railroad cuts swallowed by vines, churchyards where the names on the stones have worn smooth. The land knows how to keep quiet. So does he. If this was just a legend, it would end there. A warning folded into a landscape, passed down in half-remembered lines, but legends have a way of waking up when the right person walks into them. One autumn not long ago, when the leaves along the Blue Ridge had turned the color of dried blood and rust, someone came into these hills who carried more than a backpack on his shoulders. He said he was here to hike, to clear his head, to film the fog for his followers. The locals at the bar just watched him over their glasses and didn't argue. The mountains would decide what he was really here for. And somewhere above the tree line, where the wind sounds like distant hooves on stone, something old and patient listened to his footsteps and began to bounce. Ethan told himself he had driven into the mountains for the views. That was the version he would have given to anyone who asked at the gas station on the edge of the Blue Ridge. Just a long weekend, just a trail or two, just some time away from the city. The kind of harmless escape people post about with filtered photos and captions about resetting. His phone still had those drafts sitting in the Notes app, half-written lines about fresh air and silence. None of them mentioned the missed call. The town where the pavement ended was little more than a strip of low buildings leaning toward the road, a diner with fogged windows, a hardware store with a faded sign, a bar with no name, just a red beer logo buzzing above the door. Behind it all, the mountains rose in layers, dark blue and patient, as if they had watched 1,000 men like him roll in with backpacks and plans. Ethan parked outside a small roadside motel where the paint peeled in curls from the doors. The woman at the front desk slid a key toward him without asking many questions. People came and went up here all the time. Some chased leaves, some chased ghost stories, some chased nothing at all. She only looked up when his phone lit the counter between them with a photo of an older woman smiling over a birthday cake. The screen showed a single notification under it, one unopened voicemail. "You get service up there, it comes and goes," she said, nodding toward the hills. "Best listen to what you need to before you head out." "I will," he lied, and locked the screen with his thumb. In the room, the heater clicked like distant insects behind the thin wall. Ethan laid out his gear with the practiced movements of someone who had done this many times before. Boots by the door, pack on the chair, map folded to show the high ridge where the trail ran like a spine along the county line. He had circled a campsite marker with a pen on the screen back in the city, a little blue dot labeled Overlook, a place where the fog gathered in the mornings, according to the comments. A good view, a clean line, somewhere far enough from everything that the weight in his chest might thin out. The voicemail icon stared at him from the top corner of the display. He turned the phone face down on the table. His mother had called 3 times the night before she went into the hospital. He had been in a meeting, then on the train, then too tired to talk. He had watched the phone buzz, read the preview, "Call me when you have a minute, honey," and told himself he would answer in the morning when his head was clearer. Morning never came for her. Only a call from a number he did not recognize, and a voice that said the words he would play back in his mind until they blurred. Now, standing in a motel room that smelled like old cleaner and damp carpet, Ethan told himself this trip had nothing to do with that. People hike all the time after funerals. Grief needed space. The mountains were just space. Outside, a truck rolled past on the main road, its tires hissing on wet asphalt. Beyond it, the tree line waited. He zipped his pack, shouldered it, and stepped back out into the chill. The town looked even smaller in the gray light. A man in a worn jacket smoked on the bench outside the bar, watching the sky like it owed him an answer. As Ethan passed, the man's eyes flicked to the pack, then to the trail map sticking from the side pocket. "Heading up?" the man asked. "Yeah, just the Blue Ridge Loop. Back tomorrow," Ethan said, his voice sounded too bright in his own ears. The man took a slow drag, then nodded toward the fog that clung low between the ridges. "Don't camp where the mist doesn't lift," he said. "And if you hear somebody you know calling after dark, you keep walking." Ethan forced a half smile. "I'm hiking alone." The man looked at him a moment longer, something like recognition in his eyes. "That's not what I said," he replied and went back to his cigarette. Ethan walked on, telling himself it was just local color, the kind of spooky advice every mountain town kept on hand for tourists. Still, as he reached the trailhead and the trees closed around him, the words stayed with him, pacing his steps. "Don't camp where the mist doesn't lift. Don't answer the ones you already left behind." High above, somewhere in the stacked blue distance of the range, something shifted its weight on the stone, as if it was testing a spring. The trailhead was marked by a wooden post with a metal tag half turned by weather. A paper map was pinned under cloudy plastic, its ink faded where too many fingers had traced the same routes. Ethan checked the line of the Blue Ridge Loop one more time, more out of habit than need, then stepped past the sign and into the trees. The sound of the road thinned with each stride. After a few minutes, it was gone entirely, swallowed by the steady crunch of leaves under his boots and the soft creak of the pack straps. The air felt different under the canopy, colder, denser, as if the woods held their breath around him. Shafts of pale light slid between bare branches, painting the trail in dull silver. It should have been peaceful. That was what he had come for, after all. Quiet that wasn't filled with other people's lives, pressing through thin walls and phone screens. Out here, the only notifications were wind and birdsong. Only there weren't any birds. He realized it gradually, in the same way you notice when a refrigerator stops humming. The silence wasn't absolute. There was the small scrape of his boots, the distant drip of meltwater from some rock above, but the usual forest chatter was missing. No crows heckling from the treetops, no quick bursts of wings in the underbrush, just a wide, blank stillness that seemed to step away from him as he moved. It's November, he told himself. They're just quiet, winter mode. It was reasonable, logical, so was the fact that his fingers had hovered over his voicemail last night and again that morning, almost pressing play before he found something else to do. Logical to wait until he was in the right headspace. Logical to put it off until the drive back. Logical, logical, logical. A thin veneer over the simple truth that he was afraid of hearing his mother's voice one last time. The trail climbed in slow, steady switchbacks. On his left, the slope fell away into a shallow ravine choked with laurel and rhododendron, their leaves dull and waxy. On his right, the hillside rose in tangles of root and stone, punctuated by the pale ghosts of birch trunks. The higher he went, the more the world below blurred into gray. He checked his watch, not because he needed to make time, he had all day to reach the ridge, but because the old habit of filling silence with numbers had followed him into the woods. Steps, minutes, elevation, anything but the exact count of hours between his mother's last call and the time the hospital rang. Around midday, the trail narrowed along a spine of rock no wider than a narrow country road. On either side, the land dropped away into overlapping folds of forest, ridges stacked like the backs of sleeping animals. A thin band of fog lay in the low places, unmoving, as if painted in. Ethan stopped and drank from his bottle, the plastic crackling too loud in the hush. From here, the world looked almost clean. No traffic, no neon, no hospital corridors, just old stone and older trees. He tried to imagine what these hills had looked like in the 1800s, when the surveyors and trappers from the stories had picked their way along similar paths. Men with notebooks and chains and cheap boots, convinced they could map and measure a place that had no interest in being pinned down. A breeze slid across the ridge, thin and cold. It carried the faintest scent of wood smoke from somewhere far off, then dropped, leaving the air flat again. He walked on. An hour later, the trail dipped into a shallow saddle between two rises. The light changed in a way that made him slow down without thinking about it. It wasn't darker, exactly, just flatter, as if the color had been drawn out of the world. The trees here stood closer together, their branches knitting overhead. The ground was bare of undergrowth, instead covered in a smooth, unbroken mat of brown needles. In the center of the saddle, just off the trail, someone, or something, had stacked stones. 5 piles, each about knee-high, built from flat rocks the color of old bone. They stood in a neat line, a few paces apart, facing the same direction like soldiers waiting for inspection. No fire scars blackened their tops. No moss grew between the stones. They looked new and wrong at the same time, as if they had been built yesterday in a place that had not changed in 100 years. Ethan stopped at the edge of the line. Every part of him that grew up in cities said the same thing: art installation, bored hikers, weird local ritual. People loved leaving their mark on trails. Cairns, stacked stones, little totems of "I was here." Still, something about these felt different. Too clean, too deliberate. He took a step closer, then another, watching for any sign of a path leading to them. Scuffed soil, broken twigs, a boot print. Nothing. The ground around the piles was as smooth as the rest of the saddle, untouched except for the careful columns of rock. He thought of the old miner in the story, the one who had seen the thing in the lantern light just before the cave-in, how he said it hadn't smiled or snarled, it just watched. "Tourist art," he muttered, backing away. His voice sounded thin in the air. As he turned to go, a faint metallic taste slid over his tongue, like he had bitten the inside of his cheek. The smell of the air shifted for a second, a hint of iron. There and gone. His stomach tightened. He told himself it was just his imagination in the altitude, nothing more. He kept walking. The afternoon wore on. The sky above the trees went from dull white to the color of old pewter. The fog in the lower hollows thickened and began to climb, curling around the trunks like something waking up. Ethan checked his map and found the little dot he had marked for his campsite. According to the scale, he was less than an hour away. His legs ached pleasantly, the good burn of use. His mind should have felt lighter by now. That was the deal he'd made with himself on the drive up. Walk until the noise quiets. Let the trail scrub out the guilt the way a river smooths a stone. Instead, every step seemed to polish it. He remembered his mother's last birthday he actually attended. The cake on the cheap plastic stand, the way she had laughed too loudly at his jokes, filling the spaces where he had nothing real to say. The text she had sent a week before the hospital call, "Tyś przyjdziesz na wychodnych, prawda?" that he had answered with a thumbs-up emoji. The trail curved around a slope and brought him to a small overlook where the trees thinned. Below, a valley opened in a gray bowl. The fog pooled thick at its center. It lay there without moving, not stirred by any wind he could feel. The sides of the valley rose steeply, funneling everything down into that waiting white. "Don't camp where the mist doesn't lift." The old man's words came back with the clarity of a road sign. Ethan checked his map again. The campsite he had chosen, the one with all the glowing comments about ethereal, foggy mornings, sat right on the edge of that basin. He stood there for a long moment, weighing the blue dot against the memory of the cigarette smoke in the man's flat stare. "It's just fog," he said under his breath. "Not a curse, not a demon. Weather." Even so, when he finally left the overlook and followed the trail down, he kept an eye on the way the mist lay in the hollow. It did not thin as he descended. It rose to meet him, level by level, soft and slow and patient, like something that had all the time in the world. By the time he reached the spur trail that led to the marked campsite, the fog was a waist-high sea between the trees. The white swallowed his lower legs with each step, leaving his boots invisible. Sound changed inside it, muffled, dulled, as if he were walking under a blanket. The forest around him blurred into silhouettes. He could have turned back then. He knew that, in the same way you know when a conversation has reached a line that should not be crossed. The main trail behind him was still clear of fog. The ridge was only a short climb away. There would be other views, other places to pitch a tent. Instead, he followed the little wooden sign that pointed toward Overlook. Because that was the plan. Because he had told himself he needed one good, clean night above the world, and changing it now would feel like admitting something was wrong. Because if he started listening to every warning, the old man's, his own, he'd have to listen to the one that said he should have picked up the phone. The campsite sat on a small shelf of ground that jutted from the slope, ringed by pines. Someone had built a low stone fire ring there years ago. A couple of half-burned logs lay nearby, gray with old ash. Beyond the edge of the shelf, the valley fell away into the unbroken white. It was easy to imagine how the view would look on a clear day, layers of ridges fading into blue. Today, there was only fog, thick enough that he could not see the bottom. Ethan shrugged off his pack and set up his tent in the space between two trees. The motions were automatic: poles, fabric, stakes, guy lines. His hands worked while his mind drifted, snapping back only when a gust of cold wind pushed the mist up to his chest. He lit no fire. The air felt wrong for it, damp and watching. Instead, he sat at the edge of the shelf with his back against a tree, eating from a crinkling bag of trail mix, listening to the world try and fail to make normal sounds. At some point, almost without deciding to, he picked up his phone. The signal bar showed nothing. No service. The voicemail icon still waited at the top of the screen. He opened the call log with his thumb. His mother's name stared back at him from 3 missed calls and 1 saved message. His thumb hovered over the little triangle. Below the shelf, in the fog he could not see through, something shifted with a soft, heavy thud, like a weight landing and coiling to spring again. Ethan froze. The sound did not repeat. The forest above the mist stayed still. He told himself it was a branch dropping, a stone rolling, the echo of his own movement. He put the phone away without pressing play. Night came faster than Ethan expected. The fog swallowed the last of the daylight without much ceremony. One moment, the trees around the campsite were gray shapes against a paler sky. The next, everything beyond the circle of his headlamp slid into the same colorless dark. The beam of light cut a narrow tunnel through the mist, catching droplets that glittered briefly before disappearing. He checked his watch. Not even 9. It felt later, the kind of later that settled in the bones, disconnected from numbers. In cities, 9 p.m. meant traffic, televisions, the muffled thump of neighbors' music. Up here, it meant the world had already shut its eyes. Ethan sat in the tent's open doorway with his sleeping bag bunched around his legs, boots still on. The nylon crackled softly when he shifted, his breath fogged in the beam of the lamp. Every small sound he made seemed to double in the stillness. No fire. He had decided that an hour ago and stuck with it. Something about the way the fog pressed in at the edge of the shelf made the thought of flame feel wrong, like shining a flashlight into a stranger's window. Instead, he relied on the thin cone of his headlamp and the dim glow of the tent behind him. He told himself he liked it that way. More authentic, more immersive. The sort of thing people wrote in captions under photos of stars. There were no stars tonight, only the flat smear of cloud above and the thicker smear of fog below. He tried, once more, to play the voicemail. The phone screen lit his face in cold blue. His thumb found the message. For a heartbeat, he hovered over the icon, feeling the old reflex. I'll listen when I'm back, when I'm rested, when I'm ready. Coil like a muscle. He turned the phone off and shoved it into the sleeping bag. The wind rose for a moment, sliding through the pines with a sound like distant traffic, then died. After that, the quiet deepened in a way he could feel in his ears. The forest wasn't just still, it was listening. Ethan told himself that was ridiculous even as he reached for the hiking pole he'd left beside the tent. The metal felt reassuring in his palm, cold and solid. He propped it with an easy reach and forced himself to breathe slower, longer, the way a therapist had once told him to do when the walls felt too close. In, hold, out. Somewhere down in the valley, something thumped. The sound was dull and heavy, cushioned by the fog but still clear. Not a crack like a branch breaking, not the scatter of rock. A single contained impact, followed by a faint elastic shiver in the air, as if whatever had landed had not stayed put. Ethan sat very still. He waited for a second sound, an answering echo, the slow tumble of debris after a slide. Nothing. Rockfall, he whispered, because naming it made it smaller. That's all. His voice did not travel far. The mist caught it and pressed it back towards him, flattening the edges of the words. Another thud. Closer this time. Same weight, same soft rebound, like something heavy dropping onto a trampoline of earth and lifting again. Ethan's fingers tightened on the edge of the sleeping bag. The fine hairs along his arms rose, not just from the cold. He turned his headlamp down toward the valley. The beam hit the fog and went no farther than a few yards, collapsing into a white wall. The sound had come from somewhere beyond that wall, below the lip of the shelf where his eyes could not follow. The legend surfaced in his mind uninvited, a thing that did not walk. It bounced. He swallowed. Animals jump, he said under his breath. Deer? Elk? It's nothing. The thuds did not repeat. Instead, there came a different noise, so faint he almost missed it at first. A soft, irregular tap somewhere beneath him, as if fingers were testing the underside of the stone ledge on which he sat. Tap, Pause. Tap, tap. Ethan shifted his weight back from the edge without meaning to. The motion made the tent fabric whisper. His heart picked up speed in his chest, the pulse loud in his ears. "This is stupid," he told himself. "You're alone in the woods. Of course every sound feels like it's for you." He crawled backwards into the tent and zipped the flap halfway, leaving a small gap so he could still see out. The headlamp, now clipped to a loop overhead, cast a pale cone over the patch of ground in front of the entrance. Boots, a coil of rope, the hiking pole. Beyond that circle, the fog waited. Minutes, or what felt like minutes, dripped past. His body clock lost track. At some point, his eyes began to blur, the way they do when you're staring too long at the same unmoving thing. For a little while, the only sounds were his own breaths and the faint rustle of nylon as he shifted. Then someone said his name. "Ethan." It floated up through the fog as gently as mist rising off water. A woman's voice, soft from years of use, warmed by the slightest trace of a familiar accent he hadn't heard outside his own head since the funeral. For a split second, his brain supplied the impossible word to go with it. "Mom." He lunged for the zipper before he knew he was moving. By the time he stopped himself, his hand was already halfway down the flap, cold air spilling in over his fingers. The voice came again from somewhere just below the edge of the shelf. "Ethan, honey, can you hear me?" The exact phrasing she used when he'd moved to the city, when the line crackled and she wasn't sure if the call had dropped. The same tilt upward on "here," the same careful patience under the worry. He froze in the half-open doorway, every muscle locked. "Not real," he whispered. "Not real. Not real." The fog at the edge of the shelf stirred, but not like mist shifting in wind. It bulged inward slightly, as if something solid had leaned against it from below. "Come here a minute," the voice said, closer now. "I need to talk to you." His throat dried. Every rational thought stacked itself up in a useless pile. Sound carries in strange ways. The mind recreates what it misses. Grief can trigger auditory hallucinations. None of those explanations accounted for the way she pronounced his name exactly as she had when he was 8 and had climbed too high in the backyard tree. He gripped the tent zipper with both hands until his knuckles ached. "If you were real," he said, his voice shaking, "you'd be angry." Silence. For a moment, the fog held its shape. Then the voice spoke again, and this time the warmth was gone. "Answer me when I call you." The words fell in a flat, empty tone that was not quite his mother's and not quite a stranger's. They landed heavy in the air, each syllable a stone. Below the shelf, something thudded once against the rock. The impact sent a tremor through the ground that he felt through his knees. Ethan yanked the zipper up, sealing the tent. The thin fabric between him and the night felt like nothing at all. He backed away until his shoulders hit the far wall. The space inside the tent, small a moment ago, now seemed huge and exposed. The light from the headlamp painted every wrinkle in the nylon in stark relief. Outside, the voice did not repeat his name. Instead, another sound rose, a slow, measured series of impacts traveling along the ledge, as if something was bouncing its weight from one spot to the next. Testing. Thump. Pause. Thump. Closer. He pressed his palms over his ears, but the vibration still came through the ground, through his bones. For a while, he had no idea how long. It circled the campsite, always just beyond the edge of his light, never quite stopping. Once the impacts came so close that dust sifted down along the seam of the tent floor. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the rhythm stopped. Silence flowed back in, thicker than before. Ethan stayed where he was, hands still clamped to the sides of his head, eyes locked on the zipper. Part of him waited for the shadow of a hand to fall across it, for the curve of a horn to press against the fabric. Part of him braced for the tent to be ripped away in one clean, surgical motion. Neither happened. Instead, from somewhere out in the fog, far enough that the sound was barely more than a breath, he heard a single, hollow bounce, like a heavy, distant heart skipping once in the dark, and then nothing at all. Ethan woke to the sound of his own gasp. The tent was bright with diffused gray light, the kind that comes before the sun has committed to rising. His neck ached from the awkward angle against the wall, his hands still cramped where they had clutched the sleeping bag all night. For a moment he lay there, chest heaving, trying to piece together where the dream had ended and memory began. The voice, the thuds, the circling. He sat up slowly, wincing as blood rushed back into his legs. The headlamp had burned out sometime in the night, leaving the space dim and close. Outside, the fog had thinned to a low haze, revealing the pines in dull green and the valley below as a blurred smudge of white. No sounds, no movement, just the forest breathing in the morning chill. Ethan unzipped the flap and crawled out, boots crunching on damp needles. The air smelled of wet earth and pine sap, sharp and clean. He stood, stretching the stiffness from his back, and forced himself to scan the campsite methodically. Tent, pack, fire ring, edge of the shelf. Nothing looked disturbed. No footprints in the soft ground. No scratches on the nylon. The hiking pole leaned where he had left it, untouched. Hallucination, he said aloud, testing the word. Sleep deprivation, low oxygen, whatever. It was a good explanation. Doctors talked about grief manifesting that way. Voices, shadows, the brain filling gaps with what it knew best. He'd read articles after the funeral, skimmed them late at night when sleep wouldn't come. This was just his mind doing the same thing out here, amplified by isolation and bad timing. Still, he walked the perimeter of the shelf, eyes on the ground. Near the edge, where the rock dropped away, he found something that made him pause. A scattering of small stones, fist-sized, arranged in a loose oval around a patch of disturbed moss. The moss looked pressed flat, as if something heavy had rested there repeatedly, compressing it into a perfect circle about 3 feet across. He crouched, touching the edge. Cold and damp, but no give. Whatever had made it was gone. Animals, he muttered. Deer bedding down. Coincidence. He took a photo anyway, more for proof against his own doubt than anything. The phone screen showed the battery at 20%, still no signal. The voicemail icon waited patiently. Ethan ate a protein bar standing up, chewing mechanically while he packed. The plan was simple. Break camp, follow the spur trail back to the main loop, descend to the trailhead by early afternoon. A hot shower at the motel, a real meal, the drive home. Clean lines, forward motion. He shouldered the pack and started down the narrow path that led off the shelf. The fog clung to his ankles for the first 100 yards, then gave way to clearer air under the... Almost an hour into the descent, the trail did something unexpected. It vanished. Not gradually overgrown or washed out. Gone. The path he had followed up the day before, clear dirt between roots marked by blazes on the trees, ended at a wall of laurel thicket, impenetrable and unmarked. Ethan checked his map, then the GPS on his phone. According to both, the trail should continue straight ahead for another mile before joining the loop. He backtracked 50 yards, scanning the sides. Nothing. No faded blazes, no cairns, just solid forest floor choked with ferns and fallen branches. Must have missed a switchback, he said, turning uphill again. He climbed 20 minutes, 30, before realizing the shelf campsite was nowhere in sight. The terrain looked wrong. Steeper on the left, flatter ahead. No overlook, no fire ring. His stomach tightened. He opened the map app again, watching the blue dot pulse against the topographic lines. It showed him looping in a wide arc back toward the ridge, not down. GPS glitch, he told himself. Trees messing with the signal. Common sense said find a stream and follow it downhill. Water always let out. But the map showed a shorter cut if he cut across the slope diagonally. A mile of bushwhacking through open woods to hit the main trail lower down. He had the compass, the topo lines matched, and daylight was burning. Pride nudged him toward the shortcut. He had come this far, no point turning a 2-day hike into a 3-day ordeal over a missing path segment. He pushed into the underbrush. The woods here were older, the trees thicker, their trunks wrapped in moss that hung like gray curtains. Progress slowed to half his trail speed, branches snagging his pack, thorns catching his sleeves. But the slope matched the map, and after 40 minutes he found a game trail that ran parallel to his bearing, narrow but clear. Ethan followed it, relief loosening his shoulders. Around a bend, the trail widened into a small clearing. At the center stood 5 more stone piles, identical to the ones in the saddle yesterday, knee-high, flat-rocked, perfectly aligned. This time, the stones at the base of each pile formed shallow depressions in the shape of cloven prints, as if hooves had held position there long enough to mold the earth. Ethan stopped cold. The air went flat in his lungs. He spun, scanning the clearing. No other exits. The game trail dead-ended at the stones. Behind him, the way back through the laurel looked different now. Denser, the branches interlaced tighter. His phone buzzed once in his pocket, a single bar of signal then gone. He pulled it out anyway, thumb stabbing at the voicemail before he could talk himself out of it. The line crackled. His mother's voice filled the clearing, soft and clear as if she stood beside him. Ethan, honey, it's me. Just wanted to hear your voice. The doctor says it's nothing serious, but they want me to stay another night. Call me back when you can. I love you." The message ended. Silence rushed back in. He stood there, phone limp in his hand, the words carving fresh tracks through his chest. She had sounded fine. Tired, maybe, but fine. He could have driven the 2 hours that same night. Instead, he had waited for morning, waited for a better time, waited until there were no more times. A single thud echoed from somewhere behind the stone piles, dull, heavy, patient. Ethan dropped the phone into his pack and ran. The game trail was gone when he reached it. Laurel closed in from both sides. He crashed through anyway, thorns raking his arms, packs snagging on roots. Behind him, the thuds followed, not rushing, matching his pace with lazy precision. Thump. Pause. Thump. He burst into another clearing 20 minutes later, lungs burning, sweat cold on his skin. More stones. More prints. The same oval of pressed moss at the center, larger this time, big enough for a man. His mother's voice came again, not from the phone, but from the trees ahead. "Ethan, why didn't you answer?" He stumbled to a halt, staring into the empty air where the words had come from. The fog was rising again, pooling at the edges of the clearing, and in its shifting white he saw her for a split second. Not solid, not real, but enough. The shape of her shoulders, the line of her jaw, turning toward him with eyes that were not hers. Below her feet the ground rippled once, as if something coiled beneath it. Ethan backed away. The stones watched him go. Ethan ran until his legs gave out. He collapsed against a birch trunk, chest heaving, the pack digging into his spine. Blood trickled from a dozen thorn scratches on his arms, warm then cold in the fading light. The clearing with his mother's shape, or whatever it had been, was already lost behind him, swallowed by laurel and fog. He had no idea which way was down anymore. The sun hung low through the trees, painting everything in bruised orange. Night would come soon. Real night, not the tentative dark of the first evening. He needed shelter, water, a plan. Instead, he sat catching his breath, listening for the thuds. They had stopped when he stopped. No echoes, no pursuit. Just the forest folding back around him, indifferent. He checked the phone, battery at 12%, no signal. The map app showed his blue dot spinning in circles, refusing to lock. He turned it off to save power and pulled out the paper map instead, its folds worn soft. The topographic lines mocked him, neat brown contours that bore no relation to the maze he'd blundered into. "Idiot," he whispered, pushing the shortcut, ignoring the signs. The stone piles, the voice, the old man's warning, every choice since the motel had been a vote to ignore them all, the same way he had ignored the buzzing phone for days. He thought of her last text, the one after the thumbs-up emoji. "Розумію, ти зайнятий, але зателефонуй, коли зможеш. Просто хочу почути твій голос." He had read it at a stoplight, then swiped it away. Busy, always busy. Ethan forced himself up. Follow a ridge or stream downhill, basic roll. He picked the steepest slope to his left, assuming it led to the valley floor, and started down. Branches whipped his face, roots tripped his boots. Progress was slow, sloppy, but downhill was downhill. Dusk thickened into dark. He stumbled into a small rock overhang, shallow, barely enough to keep rain off, but better than nothing. He ate the last protein bar dry, drank from his bottle, checked the perimeter with his remaining headlamp batteries. No stones, no prints, no voices. Sleep came in fits. Every snap of branch or shift of wind pulled him awake. At some point, deep in the small hours, he dreamed of his mother standing at the kitchen sink, back to him, washing the same plate over and over. When he called her name, she turned and her face was a smooth blank oval, eyes like pits. He woke sweating, the dream's weight still on his chest. Dawn brought rain, cold, steady drizzle that turned the ground to slick mud. Ethan packed the wet gear and moved on, aiming for any sign of trail or road. By noon, his water was gone, his legs leaden. The map was useless now. He navigated by dead reckoning, choosing open ground when he could find it. The second set of stone piles found him. He crested a low rise and there they were, not 5 this time, but 7, arranged in a half circle facing downhill. Fresh, the moss beneath them still green in patches, as if laid hours ago. At the center stood a larger pile, waist-high, topped with a single flat stone that caught the weak sun like a mirror. Ethan approached without thinking, drawn by the unnatural neatness. Up close, the central stone wasn't blank. Scratched into its surface, deep enough to cast shadows, were words. Answer when called. His mother's handwriting. The tight loops on the A, the slash through the T, exact. He staggered back, bile rising in his throat. Rain or animals or vandals didn't carve like that, didn't match a script burned into muscle memory from childhood birthday cards. A thud came from behind the rise, close, deliberate. Ethan spun, nothing but trees. Then another to his left, then right. The impact circled him, lazy and precise, marking the edge of the clearing without ever showing themselves. He bolted down the slope opposite the stones, crashing through brush, ignoring the stitch in his side. The thuds paced him, always 30 yards off, bouncing from ridge to root to rock, never gaining, never fading. By late afternoon, he found a stream, shallow, peat-stained, flowing southeast. Water, direction, hope. He filled his bottle, shaking hands fumbling the cap, and followed its bank. The thuds faded behind him, then stopped. Night found him at a wide spot in the creek, a gravel bar sheltered by boulders. He built no fire, too exposed. Instead, he huddled in his wet jacket, listening to the water and his own teeth chatter. Hunger gnawed past discomfort into real pain. The pack held only a half roll of life preservers and a candy bar wrapper. He closed his eyes, willing sleep. Instead, came memories. Not dreams, memories he hadn't touched in years. His mother at the hospital 2 years prior, post-chemo, hair just growing back. "Don't put your life on hold for me," she'd said, gripping his hand. He'd promised to visit weekly, made it 3 times before work filled the calendar. The call from his sister the week before this trip. "She's asking for you. Every day." He said he was coming soon, meant it, then booked flights for a work conference instead. The final voicemail listened to now in his head, word for word. "Ethan, honey, it's me. Just wanted to hear your voice." Something thudded across the stream, heavy enough to send ripples racing outward. Ethan's eyes snapped open. His headlamp beams swept the far bank. Empty. Another thud. Upstream. Ripples. Another downstream. The thing was pacing him along the opposite shore, hidden by night and willows, testing the water's edge. "Leave me alone," he shouted. His voice cracked on the rocks, feeble. The thuds paused. Silence stretched. Then, from the dark across the creek, her voice again, but warped, now stretched thin over something deeper. "You left me alone." The gravel bar trembled under him. Ethan scrambled back against the boulders, heart slamming. In the headlamp beam, cutting through the mist rising off the cold water, he saw it. Not full shape. Fragments. Long coiled limbs folding wrong under a low torso. Hooves cloven and glistening wet, gripping impossible angles on the sloping bank. A head that turned too far. Horns scraping willow trunks with a sound like bone on bone. Eyes. Not eyes, but matched voids that drank the light and gave back reflections. In those voids, Ethan saw himself. Not now, then. Himself at 18 slamming the door after her question about college funds. 25, canceling Christmas because of a deadline. 32, screening her calls during the divorce. Every slammed door, every swipe notification, every later stacking into a tower that now crushed the air from his lungs. The thing didn't cross the stream. It didn't need to. It bounced once, high and slow, landing on the same spot with a crack that split gravel. Bounced again, closer to the water, hooves gouging twin furrows. The void stayed fixed on him, showing scene after scene of her alone at the table, her hand on a silent phone, her final bed with tubes and beeping monitors and no hand to hold. "I tried," Ethan sobbed. "I was going to, I swear." The voice came from the thing itself now, hollow through the fog. "You chose not to." It reared, all 4 limbs folding inward like suspension coils. The bounce that followed carried it across the stream in one motion. Not a leap, not a jump, but a single, weightless transfer of force that landed both hooves on his side of the gravel with a boom that knocked him flat. Ethan screamed, scuttling backwards. The head tilted, horns catching starlight. The voids widened, pulling him in. One final memory. The hospital call. His sister's voice. "She's gone." His first words. "When's the service? I need to rearrange meetings." Judged. The thing reared again. Ethan threw up his arms. Claws, or hooves, or something worse. Raked down.
then darkness.
Weeks later, hikers found the gravel bar. His pack, torn and empty, lay half buried by the stream's edge. The tent, collapsed and soaked, was tangled in branches a few yards away. Footprints circled and recircled the clearing. Deep impressions split at the heel and toe formed a pattern no animal could have made. The ground where he had stood was pressed flat like a small grave. At the local ranger station, a weathered journal was recovered from the motel room Ethan had rented. The pages told a story of escape, guilt, and relentless pursuit. It ended with a hastily scrawled line: "The mountains don't just hide secrets, they keep score." Locals whispered of the bouncing demon with renewed fear. Some said Ethan had been chosen because he carried too much weight on his conscience. Others claimed he walked into a place where the sins of the past were paid in full. Tourists passed on the legend, sharing the warnings. Don't camp where the mist does not lift. Don't answer the ones who call you from the dark. And somewhere, in the tangled ridges, a shadow still bounces, waiting for the next soul who has forgotten to face the truth.